Hello YouTube, it's Mr. Magz here, and boy do I have a doozy for you today. So I've actually done a couple of articles um on this site and this guy before, Morgan Lewis. And he the way he writes things is essentially everything wrong and everything that I hate about stupid Nintendo articles. He constantly just kind of leaves out information, skews information for skews information so that it fits his narrative, and states his opinions as fact, which is the cardinal sin. That's the thing that I hate the most whenever I do these stupid Nintendo articles. And yeah, like I said, this one is bad. So as you can see, the title is Skyward Sword is better than Breath of the Wild. It's not opinion Skyward Sword is better, not I think Skyward Sword or I believe. It's just Skyward Sword is better, which I get it. When you're making an article, you gotta have a title that drags people in, but that's just clickbait at its finest. There's no I okay, for the record, I should preface this article by saying I have never actually played Skyward Sword. I've dabbled in it with demos at GameStop and whatnot, but I've never actually played it. My roommate has played it, and I consulted him extensively before doing this video. So I have a general idea of, and I also watched a couple of playthroughs just to cross reference things. So I have a general idea of what I'm talking about essentially. I've also played Breath of the Wild pretty extensively. So just from what I've seen, just from what my roommate has said, and my roommate has played both, and he also agrees Breath of the Wild is a way, way better game. So, and I'm not just saying, oh, because I think Breath of the Wild is better, that is fact. I'm I'm saying that, based on the Metacritic scores, based on just critical reception, based on the fact that the Zelda cycle hasn't actually creeped up again, because this is really the first time I've ever actually seen anyone mention Skyward Sword being better than Breath of the Wild. Because with every single other Zelda game, the previous one is automatically better than the newest one, and the newest one sucks. Every single time. So this is the first time I've heard anyone talk about Skyward Sword being better than Breath of the Wild, which is really impressive considering it happens every single time. So, and it's not just the fact that I think Breath of the Wild is better. His logic and reasoning for it throughout the article is just not at all sound in any way. So let's start reading this. Breath of the Wild launched with Nintendo's hit console, the Nintendo Switch. By comparison, Skyward Sword launched at the end of the Wii's life cycle, which was Nintendo's last massive success. When we're talking about consoles, of course, the 3DS was pretty darn successful, and the DS as well, but whatever. Both games are great in their own way, but when it comes down to it, Skyward Sword is simply a better game. I really, really like to hear your reasoning with this, but okay. It needs to get the high definition treatment that Wind Waker and Twilight Princess received. I agree with that completely. I also wouldn't mind if they had a double pack or a triple pack and had both Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD ported to the Switch, and then also sometime down the line have Skyward Sword HD, because I just feel like that makes sense. While Breath of the Wild is superior in its vast and expansive world, Skyward Sword offers up one of gaming's most compelling narratives and sets the foundation for the most storied series in video game history. It's also more innovative with the best control scheme in any Zelda game, opening up brand new puzzle possibilities, and has the most exotic dungeons in the series. Okay, so he's going to go into all of those topics. That was essentially his thesis statement for this article. But I'll just kind of hit on one point here. Best control scheme. Skyward Sword was notorious for being kind of iffy with its motion controls, or at least some people couldn't get it and some people could. And if you didn't like motion controls, like I personally didn't, I liked Mario Galaxy, I like Metroid Prime. I just couldn't really get into them because I got really tired of holding the Wii remote and nunchuck in a way that you have to aim at the screen to point at things. I personally didn't like motion controls. So I know for a fact I would not have really liked to play Skyward Sword because you have to basically be standing up and actually swinging and stuff. I'm like, I don't mind getting a workout in. That's fine. I really actually love Wii Sports. But that's what that game is for. With a game like Breath of the Wild, you can just sit on the couch, play it, have the Joy-Con separate, just lounge around. You can take it with you. Just you can play that game any way you want. And the motion controls that are there, you just kind of tilt the Joy-Cons and that's it. I personally would really appreciate that, just being able to sit down and play a game the way I want to play it. With Skyward Sword, there was no other option outside of using motion controls. That's one thing I kind of hope they do change if they ever actually do a Skyward Sword HD. You can either have the Joy Cons be essentially the motion controls that the Wiimote and Nunchuck had, or you could just have standard button controls, which I feel might take away a bit from the experience overall. But like, it gives people options. If there was a standard button control, I might actually play it this time. But because I didn't really like motion controls in any, I felt they kind of got in the way of the experience for me personally. I feel Skyward Sword is a less interesting game. It's a game I do not want to play over Breath of the Wild. So for me personally, Breath of the Wild is a way better game just because there's a less barrier of entry in a game that I personally would rather play. So saying Breath of the Wild is not as good as Skyward Sword because Skyward Sword has a better control scheme. When some people might say they prefer Breath of the Wild's control scheme, that's really subjective there. And that's the majority of his argument. It's other than the story, but really there's a good argument for Breath of the Wild too. I'll get to that in a second. Other than that, all of his points are super subjective and personal to him. So I feel I have the right to combat that with very personal opinions of my own. Let's continue. Story. In Skyward Sword, Link and Zelda share a very special bond. They've been friends since childhood and have an obvious affection for one another. This sets a foundation for one of gaming's most incredible stories. As opposed to Breath of the Wild, which is severely lacking in the story department, Skyward Sword has a focused narrative. Link is expressive and determined as opposed to his Breath of the Wild counterpart, who you can never quite connect with. Breath of the Wild's world with Skyward Sword story would have been the perfect Zelda game, though it was not meant to be. See, I kind of feel that was intentional. You are essentially experiencing this world in Breath of the Wild the same time in the same way that Link is. He's awoken after 100 years and knows nothing. All his memories are erased. So he knows nothing, you know nothing, you're experiencing it the same way he is. And when he does get his memories back, he actually is pretty expressive in, like, when he remembers it, like, he has that look on his face, like, oh crap, this happened. And in the memories themselves, he actually is pretty expressive. If you want to talk about a character that's not expressive, go play Pokemon Sun and Moon. That guy is just smiling the entire way through, even when stuff is exploding around him, he's just smiling the whole way through it. Like, that right there is someone who lacks expression. Link does not lack expression. When Zelda is breaking down in tears, crying in his arms, he's actually, he looks like he feels sorry for her. He looks like he actually cares about this girl. So saying that he has no expression at all, I feel like you didn't play Breath of the Wild to its fullest extent, or he's leaving that part out. Also, maybe if I did play Skyward Sword, maybe wouldn't actually like the story. Therefore, that wouldn't actually be, maybe that wouldn't be a strong suit for me personally. Maybe I wouldn't actually, really like Link's and Zelda's relationship. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I couldn't connect with Link the same way I do with Breath of the Wild, because I connect with Breath of the Wild Link, like I said, on a more personal level because the player and the character are experiencing this world at the same time. Whereas if I just for some reason don't like the way Link acts in Skyward Sword, then I'm not going to like him as much. So yeah, it I really feel like so far he hasn't really presented anything that's just super potent, I guess. Does Skyward Sword have, technically speaking, does it have a quote unquote better story than Breath of the Wild? Yes, because Breath of the Wild doesn't really have a story per se, mainly because in order to have the expansive open go literally go anywhere you want in any order you want open world, having a structured story can't really work for that type of game. Maybe in the next game they kind of modify the open world a little bit, that way it's not as expansive and it's not, as open air as they call it, and it does have a more, contained story. Then then maybe that would be superior. But from what I've experienced so far in Breath of the Wild, I haven't quite finished it yet. From what I have experienced in it, I personally feel Breath of the Wild's story is good enough for the world they have presented, which we'll get more into later. Link has a determination and drive that has not been seen in any Zelda game before or since. As Link grows throughout the game into the hero we all know and love, we grow with him. The origin of the Master Sword and the great evil that will engulf Hyrule for ages is unveiled, and side characters such as the Old Woman, Groose, Impa, Fledge, and many others only enhance the story. Again, if you don't like any of these characters, like Groose, just from what I've seen, I don't like that guy really at all. So I would personally would feel every single time he shows up in that game, I wouldn't like those parts. There isn't really a character in Breath of the Wild that I just don't like. There are, of course, the voice acting isn't the best, so but it's still there. But the voice acting doesn't take away from these characters enough to say I don't like them. So even so, again, me personally, from what I know of Breath of the Wild and from what I know of Skyward Sword, same with my roommate, Breath of the Wild's characters, for me and him personally, they're better than how they're presented in Skyward Sword. My opinion, of course. Again, my opinion. The villains, such as Girahim, are some of the most memorable in the series. I will give you that. I will give you that. Ganon, by comparison, is simply there in Breath of the Wild. He has no character. Okay. So, the way they present Ganon in Breath of the Wild is actually really, really clever. So, one thing in movies that you should essentially, for every single action scene in a movie, you need to have the the goal of the scene. It doesn't have to be an action scene, just in any movie. The goal of your movie should always be in the background. When you're traveling, when it's a journey movie, when you're traveling, any montage sequence should just show the goal in the background. Any action sequence, you should always have the tower you're going to, or the final destination, or just whatever in the background. You should always know what the goal is. If there's a certain item that the people are fighting over, that should always be the center of attention. They transitioned this perfectly into Breath of the Wild. You start off the game, you go onto that cliffside, look off into the horizon, and you can see Hyrule Castle surrounded in that dark cloud with Pig Ganon just engulfing it. You know Zelda is there. That is your goal. You can go there right now. As soon as you get out the Great Plateau, you can go there. You can stop Ganon right now. Or you can go all around the world, getting more powerful, you're getting more weapons, getting all the Korok seeds, meeting all these other characters, defeating the divine beasts and whatnot. But throughout the entire process, the dark cloud can almost always be seen in the background, especially if you zoom in. It's just looming there, which I feel is is perfect for this type of game. It's this game encourages you to explore everything, but there's always this sense of dread and imminent doom just in the horizon the entire time. So saying that Ganon has no character and saying that he's just there, I feel is just a bit skewed. Clearly he didn't see this the way that I do. I've always felt like I was doing something wrong by not saving Zelda immediately, which I feel is the goal of that game. So yeah, maybe I mean if anyone else sees it like I do, please let me know. In today's gaming world, story is important, and Skyward Sword trumps Breath of the Wild harshly in this respect. Again, if you didn't like the story, and that's the main crux of this argument, I feel you're just going to like Breath of the Wild more. I mean, yes, like I said, technically Skyward Sword does have a quote unquote better story, but just the way they present Breath of the Wild, I feel conveys what you need to do, and it conveys just the way Link is adventuring through this world way better than Skyward Sword did. And again, my roommate, who actually played both games extensively, agrees with that. Okay, let's continue. Gameplay, innovation, and dungeons. The motion controls in Skyward Sword are controversial, but I've never had a problem with them. You've never had a problem with them. Many people did. Many people didn't. Many people either just couldn't make them work, or they were too intrusive, or they just took away from the gameplay when they would rather just want to sit down on the couch and just play with a controller in their hand. So you never had a problem with them, but other people might have, and it would take away from the experience. It may be because I had the special edition Wii Remote. I don't think having that gold Wii Remote would really do anything. As long as you had Wii Motion Plus, I think that's fine. Regardless, the controls were and still are incredibly innovative. They are impeccable. They are immersive. Most of all, they open up brand new gameplay opportunities. Everything is a puzzle. The combat is a puzzle, which makes fighting normal enemies such as Stalfos intriguing. Boss fights such as Girahim don't require items but still have a puzzle element to them. The one-to-one motion controls offer puzzles, both inside and outside dungeons, that no other Zelda game has offered before. The design is exquisite. Now, I've actually seen people complain about the fact that Skyward Sword essentially, especially when you're fighting Girahim, essentially forces you to only use the sword. And it makes it feel a bit repetitive and just not as engaging as other boss fights. Yes, it is a puzzle, and especially with Girahim, who actually actively counters you. And from what I actually have watched Girahim's boss fight recently, I don't know if I have the patience really to fight that. Because essentially what you have to do is you swing a couple of times, wait for him to attack you, which it seems completely random to me, and then counterattack. So the fight could last ages, really, if you don't counterattack correctly. So yes, the way the motion controls work, you really do feel like a swordsman, and you feel like you are in the shoes of Link in this situation. But it does, from what I can tell, from what my roommate has told me, it can get kind of tedious at times. And I feel, I just don't know if focusing so much on the sword play was necessarily the right way to go, especially since most people, not say most, since some people did have problems with the motion controls themselves. I personally feel Zelda really should focus more on the puzzle element of everything, because yes, Breath of the Wild, the boss fights, you knew what the weakness was, but you still had to contend with the different elements that each Blight Ganon had. So you still had to use different weapons, different items to kill them. So there was still a puzzle there, and there was an entire puzzle throughout the Divine Beast using different weapons too. So I don't know. Especially like I said, especially since the motion controls were so controversial, I feel it wasn't necessarily the right idea to just make, especially with Girahim, who you fight like 2 or 3 times. Oh, you also fight the imprisoned like 3 times too. He doesn't bring that up at all. So I might get to that later. Um, Off train of thought. Okay, so since you fight Girahim like 2 or 3 times, and you fight him essentially the same way every time, I kind of wish they had varied it up a little bit and not had just the sword combat be the main way you fight him. Hope I made my point there. Breath of the Wild, once again, severely lacked this. The bosses are carbon copies of one another. The dungeons are, dare I say, boring. The shrines offer interesting puzzles, but the physics of the game are impressive, but that doesn't make up for the lack of innovation. Um, I know I just mentioned this, but you fight Girahim and the imprisoned 2 or 3 separate times. So you saying that the bosses are carbon copies of another, which they're really not. Like they look pretty similar, but they all have different weapons. They all have different elements. They have different terrain to fight them on. It's marginally different, but there is a difference. I feel again, you're just kind of skewing information so it fits your narrative. And the dungeons might have been boring to you, but they were way more of a puzzle than anything in Skyward Sword, at least according to my roommate. So, and still, I feel you actually have to utilize more intuition. You have to utilize more of your weapons per dungeon. I don't know. I just feel again, and with the shrines, you say they're interesting puzzles, and the physics are impressive. The physics is the thing that makes this game innovative. You can solve most shrines by cheesing the heck out of it if you know what to do. And you have all these different items and weapons that you can use that makes each individual shrine its own little puzzle that you can solve in multiple different ways. I know it's not necessarily innovative, but still it's interesting and engaging and arguably better than most things in Skyward Sword. Just because you personally feel that they're boring or not that impressive or not that innovative, I personally feel that they are. Again, we're is a battle of opinions here. You can't just say Breath of the Wild or sorry, you can't just say Skyward Sword is a better game than Breath of the Wild as a definitive statement and not expect other people with different opinions to try to counter you. Being able to explore an open world is not innovative. In fact, it can get rather boring after a while when that's all there is to do. Okay, look, I get it. Maybe just exploration is not your thing. I've heard, at least from what my roommate says, from what gameplay I've seen, I've heard that Skyward Sword is arguably the most linear Zelda game. So maybe Breath of the Wild, or maybe Skyward Sword is just more up your alley. Maybe you like a more linear experience, and that's fine. But I personally really, really enjoyed just going anywhere I wanted, just fighting any challenges along the way, just looking for Koroks, looking for shrines, climbing those towers, climbing anything I wanted to, finding little, finding villages along the way, finding new ingredients to cook new things, just finding a horse and just riding it, finding a bear, just riding it. Like there is so much interesting stuff around this world that people who call it boring and barren, I don't think they played this game. Like I don't understand why people have that opinion. Like I just listed so many things you can do just by looking around this world. I don't know if you explored it to its fullest extent. So I just I'll continue. Skyward Sword's world isn't open per se, but there is still a lot of exploration to be had. The areas are dense and full of secrets. Breath of the Wild feels hollow by comparison. Um, like I said, I never played Skyward Sword, but saying Breath of the Wild feels hollow by comparison when you say the Skyward Sword's worlds are full of secrets. There are 9 100 Korok seeds. And there are 120 shrines. Meaning, statistically, anywhere you go, you will find one or both of those things. And they're not even like required to beat the game. They're just fun little secrets to find. And there are treasure chests everywhere. There are enemy camps everywhere. There are quite a number of villages. There are quite a number of horse stables. There are so many things to look for and find in Breath of the Wild. I don't understand how you can find it hollow. Yes, there are great expanses of just plains you have to cross or just rocky terrain. But even then, the game keeps you on your toes because at any minute a lightning storm could happen, or any minute, skeletons could sprout out of the ground, or any minute the blood moon could rise. So I feel saying it's hollow. It's just, again, I just don't know if you played this game to its fullest extent. I don't know if you even tried to appreciate it in any capacity. I honestly feel, this might just be the way I'm reading it, I honestly feel he might have just gone into this game and just expected not to like it, therefore he didn't. I'll continue. The dungeons in Skyward Sword are also incredibly varied compared to the lackluster design of Breath of the Wild. I would have liked you to have, a little bit of context to that. Maybe kind of, describe one dungeon from Skyward Sword and compare it to another true dungeon from Breath of the Wild. Granted, you probably would have described the Breath of the Wild dungeon as in like 3 words and that's it, and then said all dungeons are like this, but still, just something a little more other than just saying the dungeons are better in Skyward Sword. Boom, that's it. You talked about all the innovative ways you can solve dungeons and you can do things in Skyward Sword, yet you never really brought that up. You said there's new gameplay mechanics, new items and stuff, yet I would have liked you to at least have a little more of a comparison. Even if it was super opinionated, I would have liked to have a little more interaction from you. I don't know. I just feel like you weren't really trying with this. I feel you just wanted to get an article out there quick just for clickbait so that people will find the site, which is really, I just never like it when people do that. And okay. Skyward Sword is quite literally the Legend of Zelda. Its story is unparalleled in the series as well as its characters and interactions. Breath of the Wild lacks all of this. It still maintains a format of combat that have been present since Ocarina of Time, although the same can be said for Skyward Sword. The one-to-one swordplay changes everything, along with the rest of the motion controls. The dungeons are more varied and the puzzles are far more intricate, especially with the use of the motion controls, which opens up brand new possibilities. I still wish you would just given a little bit of a description about how these puzzles are so intricate or how the motion controls are used for different items and whatnot. You just didn't talk about any of these puzzles you're praising so much, yet you're just expecting us to go along with it. Again, it just really feels like this article is so rushed to the point where you didn't even put any real effort into it. And I would have actually really appreciated to have a separate viewpoint, because yes, people have been praising Breath of the Wild for over a year. I wouldn't actually mind seeing someone else say, hey, Breath of the Wild is good, but people always talk bad about Skyward Sword. Here's why I love it. I would love for you to talk about Skyward Sword in that way. But just the way you talk about it in such vague terms, I can't help but be combative towards you. Especially since I love Breath of the Wild as much as I do, and you're not really giving me any reason to think any less of it or think any better of Skyward Sword, other than just vague descriptions. But apparently, Breath of the Wild lacks all of that. It still has a compelling characters. It still has Zelda and Link, interacting together in the memories. it still has an even more expansive sense of exploration. I just don't really know. I just don't really know what you were looking for in Breath of the Wild that isn't in previous Zelda games. I mean, I guess since you did love the one-to-one swordplay as much as you did, you were just kind of upset it wasn't in Breath of the Wild, therefore you were inclined to not like it as much. But just from what I've played of Ocarina of Time, which isn't a whole lot, but still, it just kind of feels like Breath of the Wild is the natural progression of that game. They wanted to innovate Zelda in a way to make it more expansive, more open world, more choose your own adventure type thing where you can go anywhere. So they just took the core that Ocarina of Time had, blew it up, and took out the dungeons and just added more ways to interact with this world. Now, what I would have, yeah, would I have appreciated them actually having traditional dungeons? Sure. The divine beasts or whatever they're called, those dungeons are fine, but there's only four of them and they all have the same general aesthetic. So yes, I would have liked to have maybe two or three, maybe optional dungeons just to get like an upgraded sword or like upgraded bombs or something. Something like that would have been really appreciated. But they didn't, and I'm actually okay with it. I'm not really missing it per se. Essentially, just going around this world really feels like its own dungeon because there are puzzles and interesting stuff to find along the way. The most pertinent difference between the games and what truly sets Skyward Sword apart as an elite game is both Link's expressiveness and its growth as a character. By comparison, his Breath of the Wild counterpart again feels hollow and empty, which is puzzling, as Link was so expressive in both Wind Waker and Twilight Princess as well. Again, like I said, that was an aesthetic choice to really make the player feel engaged in this world. Link can't really feel really much of anything because he's experiencing all of this for the first time. All of his memories are gone. So he has nothing to work off of. He has nothing to reference. So it makes sense that he wouldn't really be that expressive even after gaining that memory. Yes, he has that memory now, but like he doesn't really know what to do with it until he collects all of them and then finally sees Zelda again. I, I just kind of feel like you're missing the point of what this game was trying to convey. Skyward Sword is an unsung masterpiece, and if it was released on the Nintendo Switch in HD, which it should be, and again, I agree with that, gamers will realize the unsung masterpiece that it is. Again, people have opinions, like, and even if they did, have the motion controls with the Joy Cons, I'm still not sure if people would really be all into that. I don't. You calling it a masterpiece doesn't really make it a masterpiece, especially since the collective Zelda community kind of deems this as the worst Zelda game, which, considering every Zelda game is basically a 10, that's not really saying much, but still, it's like a 93 as opposed to a 10, or as opposed to 100, but still. So it's still a good game, but you saying gamers will finally realize how good it is after playing Breath of the Wild, which even hardcore Zelda games agree is an amazing, spectacular game of the year contender worthy game. I I just don't know if people would appreciate it the same way you do. So don't get mad if that happens. That's yeah. While so much in Breath of the Wild feels like a chore, in your opinion, in your humble, honest opinion, it feels like a chore, which to me personally, I just decided to have fun in this game. I know that's a foreign concept to you, apparently. Skyward Sword is a true adventure from beginning to end, brimming with impeccable characters and a story for ages. If only Breath of the Wild had a story. Okay, I guess Breath of the Wild story could have been a little better. That's really the only main point you had. But again, like I said, essentially what they wanted to do with this game was have a Legend of Zelda game where you play as Link and your goal is to defeat Ganon and save the princess. That was the entirety of the story. They didn't want to build the lore any. They didn't even like set it in any timeline. They just decided, you know what, we're gonna make a Zelda game open world. That's it. I feel they succeeded in doing that. And one thing that I just kind of want to point out about Skyward Sword is that it has this UI right here where it essentially has the Wiimote right there, which is really distracting to me. Like I'm fine with having with having the button controls up in the corner of the screen in Wind Waker HD, but having the buttons just have take up the entire right side of the screen, it's just really distracting to me, and I don't think I could like deal with that if I personally was playing it. And if they do actually bring it to the Switch in HD, I hope they don't do that. I hope they either condense it to the top corner or just don't have it at all. Because at this point, you know how to play a you know how to play a Zelda game, so I kind of feel that's not needed. Um, but yeah, I personally feel that his this article just really encompasses everything I dislike about Super Nintendo articles. He has this super combative statement of Skyward Sword is better than Breath of the Wild, and then doesn't really back it up with any concrete facts. He states a lot of opinions, a lot of vague opinions, but still he states a lot of opinions, and just tries in every opportunity he can to try to downplay the spectacularness that is Breath of the Wild, and just say Skyward Sword is better without really giving anything to back it up. So I don't know. What do you guys think about this? What is your favorite Zelda game? Do you think Skyward Sword is better than Breath of the Wild? If you actually played Skyward Sword, what did you think of the motion controls? Did they feel innovative to you? Did you have any trouble with them? Leave any comments down below, like a discussion going, and I will see you.